Hello, and welcome to our webinar, The Analytics Talent Dividend. Our speakers today are Sam Raspatham, Pamela Prentice, and David Kieran, all co-authors of the recent global study on analytics talent produced by MIT Sloan Management Review and SAS. This webinar will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately one day after the end of the live event. In addition, today's slides will be available to attendees as well. We welcome your questions for the speakers today. To enter your questions via the web platform, please type them in the chat pod in the lower left corner of your screen and click the Send button. Now, let's begin our webinar. I will turn the presentation over to Sam.
Hey, thank you. Thanks to everyone who's here, and on behalf of Pamela and David, let me thank all the participants for joining us. I'd like to start off by kind of going over our brief premise of what this webinar will be about. And I'll start off with a story that we got from an interview that we did, and it really speaks to the point of how analytics is pervasive and growing. So we did an interview with Hal Varian, who's the chief economist at Google, and he was relating the fascinating story about how Panera is embracing analytical approaches. If you think about bread is a 12,000-year-old business, and people have been baking bread for forever, but Panera has really embraced analytics and information technology. They have a point of sale registers and loyalty programs. But lots of people have those now. Everybody has point of sale cash registers, and everyone has a data warehouse. And these things are going to be more pervasive throughout all sorts of businesses. It's affecting practically every business. But a key part of the story that he was telling was not so much about the technology. It was more about the role that people have in using that technology. We have a tendency, I think, to focus on cool tech and yet another analytics acronym. We can come up with a new acronym to try to keep people off their footing. But people are at the heart of this analytics, not the technology. And we're finding that technology is no longer the main barrier to creating business value from data. Certainly technology is important, but one of the themes of our report this year is about the role of people. It is contingent on people. And another interview we did was with Matthew Chaco of the Coca-Cola Company, and he was talking about the shift. And he was talking about the shift that their organization is going through as they change from, he was particularly talking about reporting at the time, the shift from looking backwards to looking forwards with their reporting. So the reporting is not so much about what they did, but what they expect in the future. And he was talking about the shifts that requires in people's thinking. And it's kind of not obvious from the quote that I have up there, but the shift he was talking about was really about people not so much producing these analytics and these reports, but how they use them and how they incorporate them to try to get advantage from them. The dividends really seem to come from people who are able to translate those analytical results into business insights. And Pamela will go into more depth on that in a couple of slides from now, but that's a big theme from our report this year. And not only is it contingent on people building on technology, but also there are dividends that we see for people embracing new approaches. An interview that we did with GE Software talked about how it's really created lots of new in their organization, a new space, a new way of looking at things, and it really has drawn people together. His comment was about the silos of the past aren't holding us up, and as I look at that on the screen right now, I can see two interpretations. He didn't mean that the silos aren't supporting us. What he's saying is that the silos were not holding us back. They're not keeping us from what we're trying to achieve as a business. And analytics is a big part of trying to help people work together there. And so the dividends then come from those new approaches. And we'll talk about those differences today, how people are getting using new approaches to talent and how they're, for example, giving preference to people with analytical skills, how they're developing skills through training programs, and how they're integrating talent with traditional data workers. Um, so we hope that this will spark some of your thinking about how leaders can gain advantage from technical talent. And David will switch now to go in and talk about some of the details about our study and the background of the study. But as a reminder, the report itself that we're talking from is available for download at the MIT Sloan Management Review site, which I think you have a link up there earlier. Yeah. David?
Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here today. That's a great overview you gave on sort of the rationale and some of the key insights that we've gotten from this recent annual report that SAS and MIT SMR have collaborated on. So we're very excited to talk about the findings from this report, which is a collaboration between SAS and MIT Sloan Management Review's Big Ideas Initiative, which is a 6-year-old research program that's exploring large-scale shifts in the marketplace that influence the practice of management. And these research areas include sustainability, digital business, and data and analytics. And this is the 3rd annual report on analytics that we've produced in partnership with SAS, and specifically in partnership with Pamela. And it's been a great collaboration, and the reports are all available for download on that that URL that you can see there, sloanreview.mit.edu/data analytics. If you haven't downloaded a copy or seen the report yet, please check out the site. Just another word about our program. The MIT SMR Big Idea Program in Data and Analytics has been running for 5 years. And we've surveyed tens of thousands of managers, interviewed close to 100 managers, and published 5 annual reports on how companies are addressing both the opportunities and the challenges connected with data. And while many of our respondents and interviewees come from the U.S., a significant percent represent companies from all over the world and most industry sectors. More than half are director level or above in their organizations. From these efforts, over this period of time, we've observed some really interesting trends in how companies are adapting to the extraordinary growth of data, how managers are viewing the importance of data and analytics, and more recently, and this is what the focus of our current report is, so how companies are trying to acquire and build on the talent to make the best use of data. So one of the trends that we've seen over 5 years is that it's becoming more difficult to gain a competitive advantage from analytics. When we first started the research program in 2010, the strategic importance of analytics wasn't yet on the corporate radar. Less than 2 out of 5 respondents to our survey said that analytics was delivering a competitive advantage to their organization. Back then, analytics was a new path to value. But from that point, there's been a steep rise and subsequent leveling off in the number of managers who say analytics is creating a competitive advantage for them. I'll mention several reasons for this trend. A big one is that today, analytics has become a common path to value. It's harder to get an edge with analytics when your competitors are also using analytics to get an advantage. Compounding the problem is that some of the more skilled data workers and analytics executives are moving from one company to another. And when your competitors have the analytics talent you once had, you not only have to get new talent, but also integrate them, which takes time. In the past 2 years, we're seeing the real signs of a diminishing return from big investments in analytics when it comes to competitive advantage. And it has to do with sort of the competitive landscape that companies are operating in, but also there's some internal reasons as well. Turning data into strategic insight is challenging. And what you see here is that the companies don't seem to be able to use data as frequently to their advantage, despite having more access to data. Indeed, the green bars indicate the companies are drinking more from their data hoses. The intensity of the data that's coming out of their data hoses is getting more intense. And the orange bars are indicating that they're becoming less able to use insights to guide strategy. The gap here is growing between the ability to leverage more data for more insights that can guide future strategy. And this is important. This is an important trend because developing strategy development is typically either the original source of competitive advantage within a company or an important means of sustaining that advantage over time. A significant reason for this growing gap is that information management skills haven't advanced much over the past 3 years. And only 40% of managers are feeling that they have frequently all the data that they need to make the decisions. So another reason is that the end users, the leaders who actually use the insights, may not always have the right skills to properly consume the insights that are generated by the data analysts and data scientists. And this is something that we discuss in an article that we published recently in MIT SMR called Minding the Analytics Gap. And we're going to turn it over to Pamela at this point.
Thanks, David, and thank you for that lead into our main focus of our discussion today, which is talent. So David set up the scenario where we've got that point of diminishing return, that point of inflection, if you will, where companies are having a little bit more of a challenge wringing competitive advantage from their data. So one of the things that we wanted to explore in this research is what is it that the companies are lacking that could help them improve that and turn that curve around and push it on the upswing again. So talent was the thing that we wanted to talk about, and we know that we don't have any lack of data. In this chart, we see, as David pointed out, that the percent of managers who see an increase in their useful data is growing, but insights are declining. So we want to look at the inhibitors to the effective application of analytics. And what we found out here was that, interestingly, the appropriate analytical skills, the lack of appropriate analytical skills, is the key inhibitor of analytics. So the number one issue is it's kind of a translation issue. It's turning analytical insights into action. And that is taking all that information, the algorithms, the data mining, the reports, and communicating that to the business so that organizations know what to do. You know, how do I take this mathematical application and turn it into a strategy or a campaign or a tactic? So we know that a lot of the people that are crunching the data, the people that are doing the analytics, are more quantitatively oriented, and often statisticians don't understand the business. So the statisticians, the data miners, they are there employed to look at the data, to manage the data, find interesting things in the data, but a lot of times they can't make that leap from their output, their algorithms, to now how do I apply this? So 50% of our organizations are saying that that is a key inhibitor. The second thing that our respondents noted was that aggregating multiple data sources is a key challenge. So this was no surprise. We often get results from our research that shows that data quality, volumes of data contribute in large part to challenges in deploying analytics and deploying effective analytics. And as the amount of data grows and companies are capturing unstructured data, far more than transactional data, they're looking at social media, they're looking at mobile, they're looking at RFID, sensor data, et cetera. these silos of data, these sources of data, are becoming more and more difficult for the organization to manage, and then by default, more difficult to aggregate. So that came out as number 2. And then number 3 is the lack of appropriate analytical skills. So 43% of our respondents are saying that they have a lack of appropriate analytical skills as a key challenge. Not surprising, it also relates to our first one, turning analytical insights into action. So what we're seeing here is that technology, which may have been a problem in the past, not having the appropriate technology is no longer the primary roadblock to analytics. So lack of appropriate analytical skills is a fairly broad category. That can encompass everything from math to data mining to programming to data visualization. So we wanted to drill down into that to find out what organizations mean when they talk about the lack of appropriate analytical skills. And what came out in this question was extremely interesting. The skill gaps are not quant related. The biggest skill gaps are related to kind of understanding the business, knowing what data to analyze, asking the right questions. So the primary skill gap, and this is by far, so you see we have a 51% response to this question. What the biggest skill gap is translating analytics into business strategy or specific action, and that correlates very strongly with the previous slide where turning analytics into insight was one of the biggest challenges. So it makes sense that that's also a skill gap. And then the next largest gap was asking the right questions. Again, you see that quant is not part of the top 3, but asking the right questions. So we have all of this data. We have all the technology. We have the infrastructure. And now we're sitting in a room, and we're not sure what questions to ask to glean the most out of our data, to make our analytical applications more effective. And then related to that, we see that knowing what data to analyze is also one of the top 3 skill gaps. So again, summarizing, that quant is not the biggest skill gap, and as a matter of fact, it doesn't show up until number 4. Data analysis and data mining had a 25% response rate. Communicating results to the business was 22%, and data modeling was also 22%. Interestingly, stat and math skills were ranked number 9 on a list of 12. So analytics translation, if you will, the interpretation of the information, being able to tell the story, is really the most the biggest deficit in terms of skills in the organization. So now that we know that companies have these talent issues, what can we say about the effect of talent on competitive advantage? And that's where we get into measuring the difference between companies who feel like they have the appropriate analytical skills and companies who do not feel like they have the appropriate analytical skills. If you remember at the beginning, David showed the graph with the ascending competitive advantage through analytics that peaked last year at 66 and now is down to 61%. Here we see the huge difference between companies who have the right talent and companies who do not have the right talent. And again, this is self-reported. So we had a question that asked, to what degree do you feel like you have the appropriate analytical talent to make good use of analytics? So the bar on the right are people who said that they did not feel that they had that appropriate talent. And this is people who feel that they do have that appropriate talent. And this number then represents the competitive advantage that they feel through analytics. Now remember, the overall rating was 61%. That's among all organizations. So that you see this big delta here that analytic talent really drives competitive advantage. Also related to this is that company with the right analytics talent outperform others financially. So the effective use of analytics, driving the analytics through the organization, creating the competitive advantage, all related to having the right talent in the right place, yields great results. The next thing I want to talk about is categorization of organizations based on their maturity in their use of analytics. When we first started this study a couple of years ago together, we identified organizations based on their responses to the question, does analytics provide a competitive advantage for your organization, as well as the question, does analytics help your company innovate? So the intersection of those two created a category called the analytical innovators. And then from there, we did some additional analysis with factors and determined that we came out with 3 distinct groups. And I'm going to talk about each one of these groups in a minute. So again, this is from a report from 2013 called From Value to Vision, Reimagining the Possible with Analytics, where we talk in detail about each one of these segments and describe how an organization can move from one segment to the next. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about talent. So let's talk about the analytically challenged. So this group, just as a backdrop, because we're going to get into the talent related to these particular segments, this group represents about a third of organizations in our survey, and it has been consistent over time. We haven't seen a whole lot of shift in the percentages of these 3 groups. And this group tends to rely on experience, and they're sort of, gut feel based. They don't really have any burning platform or issues that are impelling them to push organizations. To push analytics through the organization. Their senior management is kind of not particularly interested in analytics. They have kind of a data apathy. When they do use analytics, it tends to focus on cost reduction, and the analytics they use tend to be fairly simplistic and really describe information as opposed to doing any real analytical work with it. Our second group are the analytical practitioners, and this is the bulk of the organizations. And these are people that have moved up the maturity ladder in terms of their use of analytics and are now focusing more on operational issues. They're aspirational in their use of analytics. They understand the value of information. They're trying to get their ducks in a row. But at this point in their maturity, they're kind of at just good enough and sort of making do with the data. They know the data isn't particularly clean, but they're doing what they can with it. They are more operational in their use of analytics, and process improvements and things like that tend to be what they focus on. And they are a little bit more sophisticated in their use of analytics, so they tend to use the descriptive and add some of the predictive applications as well. So that gets us to our third group, kind of the poster children for the use of analytics. And this group is particularly interesting because it does represent a small percentage, and they are kind of at the pinnacle, of the use of analytics. 12% of our organizations, and again, they're defined by the fact that they've said that analytics provides a competitive advantage for their organization, and that analytics helps them innovate. So they've got that kind of the double, the vortex of what they're getting out of analytics, and really are performing well on most of the attributes. They have strong information management skills. There's top-down support for analytics, and in many cases, analytics is a management mandate. They view data as an asset, so data is valued. They're metric-driven. They want to see things in facts. They tend to have a much stronger analytics culture. And in some cases, this is a little bit anecdotal, but in some cases we believe that analytics culture might have been kind of part of the fabric of the organization before all of the hype about analytics started in 2007. They do use analytics more strategically. They set direction. In some cases, they're actually going into particular lines of business. They are deciding what products to discontinue. So much more strategic in their use of analytics. And they are also getting into prediction and description. And what we find among this group is that they are much more mature in their use of sophisticated techniques. So I am now going to turn it back over to Sam. And Sam, will you please tell us a little bit more about these three categories and how their analytical maturity affects talent?
Well, that's a great lead-in, yeah. So Pamela described some of the key analytical maturity differences in organizations. And so then, given that the focus of our report and study is on talent, so how then do these maturity differences relate to talent? So we started by asking people in organizations whether or not they had the appropriate talent, and we showed you previously some aggregate numbers, but if you look at the split by the different maturity levels, you see some strong differences in the presence of the appropriate talent within organizations. These analytical innovators have 74%, and if you think about that, that's 57% more people responded yes than the analytically challenged organizations. It's going to test my actual analytical skills here off the top of my head, but that's about 4.3 or so times as many people thinking that they've got appropriate analytical talent than do not. And the difference is it's still strong between our analytical practitioners. There's about 31% difference in people agreeing that they have the appropriate talent. And I should just kind of note that that's not tautological. As Pamela mentioned, we defined the maturity levels based on things besides talent. So this is definitely an association of having the appropriate talent with that sort of analytical maturity. So, I think you if you were sitting there in the audience, you might say, well, all right, so why don't I just solve this problem and get more analytical talent? And that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction here. But, of course, that seems to be much, much easier said than it is to actually do. So we actually asked them, how are you able to attract and retain analytical talent? And here it's interesting because we asked them both if they had difficulty attracting and retaining, and the analytically challenged organizations are clearly having some trouble attracting and retaining people, less so with the analytical practitioners, and then the analytical innovators they're still not perfect, but they're doing much better. An interesting note is that attraction and retention are largely the same, except for with the analytical innovators, where we've got a 29% versus 24% difference in their ability to retain versus attract. And I think it's interesting. So I think it seems like that once people are in those organizations that are having successes, then it's even stickier for those organizations. It kind of raises the grip that those analytical innovators might be having on the talent. If you think about the phrase that the rich get richer, or the Matthew effect, well, that seems to be happening a bit here. That once people go with organizations that have strong analytical cultures, then people are happy and they want to stay there, and they don't have trouble retaining those people. Beyond the survey, we also did interviews, as David mentioned, and a couple of those interviews really underscored that. So I talked with Google and people like the Echo Nest, and both of those organizations didn't really speak to much trouble of having difficulty in attracting and retaining people. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. I mean, when people want to go to Google, they have a chance to do things at scale that they may not be able to do at any other organization, or places like the Echo Nest, where if you are into music, then that's the place to be for doing analytics on music. So people that are that are successful there are able to attract and retain in ways that with others just really aren't. But for everyone else, there's a projected shortage of analytical talent, and they face stiff competition for this talent. If you think back, there's a lot of similarities here than there were with the .com boom and bust 20 years ago, where there was a giant scramble for technical talent. Now, I think there's some similarities here, and there'll be some differences with that .com boom. And actually, if you look at the Sloan Management Review site, we've got some discussion about that in an article we've written there. But given this, you'd think that organizations would be doing something different to solve this problem. If we've told you that analytical talent is driving success, and it's hard to attract and retain given what you're doing, I think the next step might be to think, hey, maybe we should do something different to try to attract these people. But in the survey, we just found that that's not true, that companies aren't really doing much different. They tend to be doing about the same thing with analytical talent as they are with other talent, which, is maybe time to rethink that. So then the next question we asked people was, where are you getting that talent? Where's this talent come from? And these roughly align to our classic sort of strategy problem of make, buy, or ally. Are you getting people from outside the organization, either through universities, for example, or hiring them from other organizations? And there seems to be a good bit of that going on. Other people are also developing people internally, either through on-the-job training or formal training, and then some are doing outsourcing. These orangish bars here are the analytical innovators, and if you notice that in all cases, it looks like the analytical innovators are just doing more. Across the board, they're just doing more on-the-job training. They're doing more training in general. They're more hiring from outside. But one place that they're not doing more of is in outsourcing. So I think that's an interesting finding, is that that there are some differences in how they approach that sort of talent. And anecdotally, from talking to people and beyond the survey, in our interviews, it seems like that the analytical innovators are maybe outsourcing different aspects of analytics than others are. We didn't ask that question to follow up, and I kind of maybe wish that we had to find out what exactly people are outsourcing. But I got the sense from talking to people that the things that the analytical innovators are outsourcing tend to be much more routine. Once they've developed that sort of core competency in doing something, then once it becomes routine, then it becomes something they outsource because they've got some internal skills there. There's another aspect here that's too, is that it's a little hard to tell from this whether the analytically challenged organizations are either not trying to hire people with analytical skills, or they're not able to. So in each one of those are two different problems, and actually we'll get into some of this in some coming slides. Another point to mention too is that these sort of on-the-job training that people are doing, if people are doing on-the-job training, they actually must be doing something analytical. That kind of implies doing. So that speaks well to analytics being pervasive in all organizations here. Internal sourcing is particularly interesting because it ties well to the issue of integration and how do you integrate people with analytical skills and without. And given that Pamela mentioned earlier the issues of translating being a problem, internal sourcing is helpful towards that, translating the business knowledge to the analytical results. And I think Pamela will get into that in just a few minutes. Next, we ask people how they're working with analytical talent. And again, what we see here, that there are stark differences in how people are, for example, hiring. This is about hiring and promotion. How people get a preference for hiring or promotion within the analytically challenged organizations and within the analytical innovators. A strong difference there. one of the things that's not on this slide, but we found that overall about 1 in 5 organizations have not changed their hiring and promotion practices. Have changed. So most of them have not changed their practices. So that speaks to one of the, I think, the larger points of our study is the idea that people need to get together and get a plan in place for how are they going to transition their organization. As I mentioned just a minute ago, getting these people is only part of the challenge. Getting these analytically savvy people to work with the existing people in organizations can be a challenge. We see stark differences in how people are integrating, how successful people are at integrating analytical talent with other talent. We have an interview coming up that hasn't been published on our site yet, but it's with a distributor that works with many people in their organization that have not historically been analytically active. One of the things that they're doing is they're having success in diffusing analytics throughout their organization. A key lesson there was they have a plan for it. They've started small. They've showed some evidence. They're building off that evidence. And I think those are some lessons that can go to other organizations. We specifically asked about data scientists. About 27% of the organizations reported having someone with data scientist or a data scientist type role. And we don't think there's really any magic. We don't think that organizations can be magically transformed by creating or changing a job title, but we do see it as more of a signal of some latent analyticalness within the organizations. And it's interesting that each one of these items, each of these 4 questions that we ask, really speaks to having a plan in place about analytics. If people, this is the green bar, if the people in the green bar, they do have a data scientist role, and they're 52% versus 22% to be prioritizing projects, much more likely to have a formal analytical strategy. And they're doing things like measurement, which is true for all projects within organizations, but they're applying those to analytical projects. And they're doing this recruiting differently. So, one of the other questions, and then this is not in the report, but we asked people, what are these data scientists doing? And we found that like 55% or so saying that they're supporting actual big data projects. They're 55% are supporting a centralized analytics group. 48% are helping to integrate analytics across the organization, and 46% are supporting data strategy development or transitioning legacy systems to more advanced analytical approaches. So there's a variety of roles that these data scientists are having within organizations. But it's not just within organizations. To lead into what Pamela will talk about next, the effects of data scientists are working beyond the individual organization. They can go beyond that. Pamela, tell us about that.
Okay, sure. Before I get into that, I did want to just address this data scientist notion and what it takes to become a data scientist. And the definition of data scientist is not specifically accepted. There are a number of different definitions. People view data scientists in different ways, but I think the key aspect of the difference between a data scientist and data analyst would rest in the ability to look at the bigger data picture, if you will, and the new types of information that are available and what's coming down the pike. And so there's a lot more intricacy involved in the data scientist role than there might have been in the what we formerly called data analyst. So with that, I wanted to kind of wrap up the discussion on data scientists before we move into recommendations. Because originally when we put this presentation together, I wanted this particular slide to say data scientists are changing the world, but my colleague Sam said that was a little bit too hyperbolic, and convinced me that the data that we have do not show that. But the fact is that data scientists are changing the world. And I wanted to just give a few examples of some things that are going on with big data outside of the traditional organization and how data scientists are really making an impact. And, of course, Tom Davenport, everybody knows Tom, has defined data scientists and says that that role is the sexiest job of the 21st century. So if that's the case, then I think we can say data scientists are changing the world, or at least changing the world's perception of them, right? And and who they are as people. So at the top, starting at the top of our circle here, you may or may not recognize that as the Ebola virus. One of the things that data scientists have done, and of course are still working on, when the outbreak was at its peak, they were using cell phones that they were giving to people in the places that were most impacted by the virus, and those people were texting back when there was a new outbreak, and the data scientists were able to use that mobile information to predict where the next spread of the virus would be. So that was an interesting use of data scientists and mobile data. The next one here is a mosquito, and you might think about malaria, but I'm a horse owner, so West Nile virus is of particular interest to me. There's a website called Kaggle, which if you're on this call, you're probably familiar with that. It's a website where competitions are started among data scientists, and anyone can participate. Problems are put out for people to address using big data. And so this particular project is one that's currently in process where they're asking the data scientists to look at the most likely places of the West Nile virus in the Chicago area. A third way, and this is really a global humanitarian way, the data scientists have made an impact on the world is looking at poverty. And the specific case that I'm talking about is poverty in Kenya and Uganda, where despite the low level of income, a lot of people in those third world countries do have cell phones. So the data scientists teamed up with an organization that as a charity, and wanted to understand where the most impact could be made with directly funding donations to people in these villages. Because a lot of times people donate and there's administrative costs, and the ultimate recipient only gets a fraction of that dollar. So the data scientists did use a lot of social, economic, mobile data, and plotted out where those key areas were. I don't think I'll have time to go through each and every one of these because we're about to hit our time frame. But I did want to talk about this one up here on the left-hand side of the circle, and this is testing. We're all familiar with standardized testing, and most people have pretty strong opinions about them, particularly if you've had to take one recently or your children have to take them. So this particular project was data scientists looking at a lot of information from previous standardized tests and coming up with methods that would help these tests be scored more efficiently. So the essay writing was part of it. There's a pretty subjective component to the essay evaluations. So they used unstructured data and looked at essays over a period of years and made some recommendations on how to refine that. So just again, data scientists are changing the world, the sexiest job of the 21st century, and there's plenty of opportunity for people moving into that area. So with that, David is going to move us on into recommendations.
Thank you, Pamela. So we do have a couple minutes left in our presentation before we move into the question and answer session. And I'd like to just talk through a couple of recommendations that we describe in more detail in the report, The Talent Dividend. And after that, I'll moderate the Q&A session between the questions that have come in, and of which there are many, and our other presenters. So the first recommendation is look inside to tap internal talent. Most organizations already have talented workers who want to be part of the next wave of management innovation, and they want to advance their careers. These workers, often the go-getters and self-starters with an affinity for numbers, can be an invaluable source of analytics talent in an organization. Invaluable in part because they already know the business. And what we found is that executives actually prefer to hire a manager that knows the business and train him or her on analytics rather than hire an analyst and train him or her about the business. Business in some cases is actually harder to learn than the analytics. And in the report we describe we tell the story of Colleen Roberts, who's a nurse at Intermountain Healthcare, which is based in Utah. She'd gone right from high school to nursing, but at the age of 42 began working on a master's degree in clinical informatics at the University of Utah. And the company paid for her tuition to learn more about analytics, and she wound up becoming an important facilitator between the analytics teams, the physicians, and administrators. And she's now the operations manager for the entire cardiovascular clinical program, which is a very big program there. The next recommendation is focus on talent integration, not infusion. There's acquiring talent is a really a great step toward making the most of one's data, but these workers have to overcome several challenges. They can't just be inserted into an organization with great expectations, in part because those expectations may not be shared by, well, the people who are already there, who could feel jilted by the presence or the behavior of the new data stars. We tell the story of a new data scientist at General Mills, their first data scientist, who saw firsthand how other data workers felt threatened by him as he went about identifying what the company knew about its customers in different organizational silos. He was hired into the marketing division, and the folks in the information technology group thought he had been brought in to criticize what they had been doing. And it took months of executive support and regular meetings to establish good rapport. The next recommendation is to set up a buddy system. And what we found time and again is that bridging the gap between analytics and the end user, interviewees and people we interviewed talked repeatedly about the importance of this. And what we found is that many successful analytics initiatives pair analytics professionals with people in the field. At GE, which has really doubled down on building up its business around sensor-based analytics, found that pairing software developers, data scientists, and business subject matter experts were crucial to developing an airline monitoring application that helped improve aircraft engine performance. The next recommendation is build a common core. And there are a couple of different issues around building a common core. I'm going to speak about one, and that has to do with data governance. And a great example that we came across was at Aetna, the insurer in 2012. And the president at the time told his leadership team that the company had lost $270 million and asked the business heads what was going on in their business. Each business line president said their unit was making a profit. He said, this is a big problem because the company's losing hundreds of millions of dollars, but you guys are all saying that you're making a profit. There's a big problem. And he decided that he had to be a data dictator and dictate what data meant across the organization so he could compare apples to apples and figure out where the problem was. So without a common set of definitions, he realized it can be hard to use analytics effectively across the enterprise. And so again, in our interviews, many managers across industries, the Coca-Cola interviewee that Sam mentioned earlier, among others, have emphasized the importance and challenge of standardizing data across the organization. So those are four key recommendations that we talk about in the report. I want to move to the question and answer session. A lot of great questions have come in, and our respondents to these questions are going to be Sam and Pamela. I'm going to pick a couple of questions. We have about 10 minutes left in the session, and so the first question, and I'll direct this to Pamela, is what are appropriate analytical skills? There have been a couple of slides that mention the lack of appropriate analytical skills in organizations. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, that is a good question. So, we were delving down into some of the things that we had on the survey, which included math skills, data mining skills, et cetera. So there is no right answer to that. A lot of the skills that are necessary from an analytics standpoint depend on the maturity of the organization. I'm not trying to side skirt the question, but if an organization is in the analytically challenged category, the set of analytical skills that might be necessary there would probably focus around data management, data quality. So you'd want somebody who is able to get the data in order before you start to try to progress down the path of using analytics effectively. That said, there was a question about how one moves from one segment to the next. I mean, how do you progress? And that we covered that in our original paper, but kind of in a nutshell, what we want to make sure organizations understand is that there's no one size fits all, but the path really involves getting senior management on board with the concept of analytics. So let me go back to the original question. Quant skills for an organization in the operational, the second category, the one that's the analytical practitioners. In those organizations, data is more under control. There's a higher level of data quality, although it's not the best data. But now you can start adding the quant skills. And then, that third element of effective analytics is that interpreter quality. So you need someone who either understands the math and can do the math and interpret it for the business, or you need someone who is the interpreter between the quant guy and the business person. Because a lot of times what we find is when a data scientist stands in front of an organization, executives to tell a story about what the analytics have discovered, they want to talk about the data. They want to talk about the methodology, and they really need to be able to bring that to life. They need to be able to say, this is what it means to the business, and these are the specific actions that need to be taken. So those three skills, data management, quantitative skills, and that interpretive skill.
Thank you, Pamela. That's a great in-depth answer to that question. Next question for Sam. You've after having completed the report and you did the survey, you've gotten thousands of responses. Are there questions that you would have liked to have asked in retrospect now that you've gone through the exercise of developing the report?
Gosh, I hope it's not bad for me to say that there are lots of things that I think that we would do different. I think we can say that within our trusting relationship here. I think one of the things that came out of the report was that you ask a question and you got some sort of response that you weren't expecting, and you'd love to be able to go back to people and ask more detailed questions, and that's something that we can do in the interviews that we're not able to do in the surveys. Off the top of my head, I'd like to see actually tying into what Pamela was just saying, like what exactly give us much more detail about the skills that are missing, or what are people screwing up? What are ways that it's not working? I think we could ask much more about that. But I'm also curious about the other side. Like what are people who are who are this analytical talent, these silver unicorn people, what are they looking for when they're going to organizations? What's making them interested in staying and retaining and being attracted to organizations? I think there's a lot more that we could find out there as well.
Just to follow up on that, each year we've done this study. We've come up with a theme. So the first year that SAS partnered with MIT, we took it beyond the new path to value to moving from value to vision. So our first one was focused on identifying these three categories and the maturity of use of analytics in the organization, and then measuring that based on the outcome of analytics. And then the next year we thought, well, what's kind of driving that overarching bent toward analytics? So as a result of that study, we went into culture. So last year we produced the Analytics Mandate, which focuses on culture as an important part. And then we started looking at that data, and we said, hey, talent looks like it's a really important factor as well. And hence we came up with the focus of this study. But it's a great question, and I think what we'll do, our next steps are to determine what it is that we want to focus on next year.
Great. So why? Perhaps one of the questions we'll wind up focusing on is a question that was raised here: is that why aren't companies doing anything differently if they appreciate the value and importance of data and analytics? Talent is a key part of that story. The talent, there's a premium on talent, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of behavior change around the corporate approach to the acquisition and cultivation of analytics talent.
Where's that going? Is that to me?
Yes, it's to you, Sam.
Sam.
Okay, yeah, that sounded hard. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're all like that, aren't we? I mean, I have difficulty in changing what I want to do every day, and certainly it's hard for organizations to change what especially successful organizations, if they've been successful in the past, it's really hard to make those adjustments. So I think we see many of the same things that you see with other large scale changes in organizations. Some of the people that may be changing more quickly are people who have had some sort of crisis or have got that. To pull a phrase from a prior report, they got that burning platform about, hey, something's wrong, we've got to change it. So I think there are people involved in all these things, and there are people who have normal daily jobs. Actually, one of the anonymous responses to our survey, we kind of have some open-ended questions, and one of them is, they said that I think the phrase was financial crisis trumps analytics, and the point there was that, hey, they're dealing with a lot of other stuff right now, and it's hard. And that's another respondent said that they're too busy putting out fires to be able to be proactive. So I think it's a lot of the usual suspects.
Okay, last question to Pamela. So one of the questions that came in from the audience today was concerned a slide that I believe you were discussing about analytical turnover in challenged organizations. What is driving turnover in challenged organizations? Because I think the slide had the same high level of challenge groups attracting and retaining analytics talent. What's driving turnover in analytics talent there?
Right. So that's an interesting question. One of the things that slide indicated was that the challenged organizations do have more difficulty attracting, and then once they get them, they have a lot more difficulty keeping them. So what we found in our discussion, in SAS, my organization, discussion with companies, is that the difficulty comes because the data scientists really have a broad spectrum of opportunities out there. They're in high demand. So they are looking to choose the ones that they think will be most interesting. Work on complex problems, work on something that will make a difference. So a lot of times when a challenge organization is able to snag a talent like that, they're not far enough down the maturity curve in analytics to give that data scientist something that the data scientist wants to work on. A lot of times they're just doing housekeeping and cleaning of the data, and that's not what they want to do. They want to get into it. They want to make recommendations. They want to basically change the world. So you see a lot of turnover that way. I hope that answers the question because I know we're out of time.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm going to hand it back over to Annette, and thank you all so much.
Thank you. Sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all the questions that came in.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our program. A reminder that a recording of this program and the presentation slides will be available within 48 hours. Thank you for attending our program today.